In 1963, a German archaeologist named Klaus Schmidt was studying museum collections in Istanbul. He kept seeing strange stone tools. They came from a hilltop in southeastern Turkey, a place called Göbekli Tepe. The hilltop had been surveyed before, in the 1960s. American researchers looked at it. They saw some broken stones on the surface. They assumed it was a medieval cemetery. Nothing special. They moved on. Schmidt saw something different in those tools, something that didn't fit. The style was wrong for a cemetery, too old, too sophisticated. He thought the hilltop might hide something else. In 1994, he went there himself. The hill rises from flat plains. Wheat fields stretch in every direction. The nearest town is Şanlıurfa, about 10 miles away. It's hot, dry, the kind of landscape that feels empty until you look closer. Schmidt started digging test trenches. Within days he hit carved stone, massive pillars, T-shaped, standing in circles, buried under tons of earth. He realized what he'd found, and it changed everything we thought we knew about human history. The temple at Göbekli Tepe is 11,600 years old, maybe older. It was built before pottery, before metal tools, before agriculture, before permanent villages, before writing, before everything we associate with civilization. The people who built it were hunter-gatherers. They still lived in temporary camps. They followed herds. They gathered wild plants. They had stone tools and animal skins and not much else. But they built this. Massive stone pillars, some weigh 16 tons, carved with images of animals, foxes, lions, scorpions, snakes, vultures, arranged in perfect circles, multiple circles, layer after layer going down into the earth. And here's what makes no sense. After they built it, they buried it. Deliberately, carefully. They filled the whole thing with rubble and dirt, tons of it. They covered every pillar, every carving, every circle. Then they built another level on top, and buried that too. This happened over and over, for 1,000 years. Why would anyone do that? Why build something so massive, so complex, so beautiful, and then bury it? Why spend generations constructing and destroying and constructing again? Schmidt spent 20 years trying to answer that question. He died in 2014. The temple is still being excavated, still revealing secrets. But the mystery remains. The first monumental architecture in human history, built by people who supposedly couldn't build monuments, and then deliberately hidden from the world. If you're using this to fall asleep, that's exactly why I make these videos. Maybe subscribe and let me know where you're watching from and what time it is. I always check the comments and it's fascinating to see people from all over the world. Let's continue. The first thing Schmidt's team uncovered was a pillar, just the top of it, sticking up through the dirt. They kept digging. The pillar went down and down, 12 feet tall, carved from a single piece of limestone, shaped like a T, arms extending from the sides, almost human-looking but abstract, stylized. Then they found another pillar next to it, same size, same shape, standing parallel to the first one, about 10 feet apart. They kept digging outward. More pillars, arranged in a circle, some with carvings, animals in relief, foxes with bushy tails, snakes coiling around the stone, scorpions with stingers raised. The detail was incredible, precise, deliberate. Schmidt realized these weren't just pillars, they were arranged like people standing in a circle, facing inward. The T-shape suggested shoulders and a head. These were representations of beings, watching, waiting. The circle was about 30 feet across. The pillars formed a ring. In the centre, 2 larger pillars stood, taller than the others, facing each other across empty space. This was a room, or a temple, a place designed for gathering, for ritual, for something. But here's what made Schmidt stop and reconsider everything. The style of the stone tools they found, the way the pillars were carved, the whole construction technique. It dated to the pre-pottery Neolithic A period, around 9,600 BCE. That's 11,600 years ago, before agriculture, before domesticated animals, before permanent settlements, before pottery or metal or writing or wheels or any technology we associate with building monuments. The people who made this were supposed to be simple hunter-gatherers, mobile groups, following game, gathering plants, living in temporary camps, using stone tools and animal skins. They weren't supposed to be capable of this. Think about what it takes to build something like this. First, you need to find the right stone, limestone blocks, massive ones. Some of these pillars weigh 16 tons. That's 32,000 pounds, the weight of 8 cars. You need to quarry them, cut them from bedrock, shape them, carve them, without metal tools, just stone on stone, pounding, grinding, chipping away. Then you need to move them, 16 tons, uphill, across rough terrain. How many people does that take? How do you coordinate it? How do you even organize that many people when you're supposed to live in bands of 20 or 30? Then you need to stand them upright, dig holes deep enough to support 12-foot pillars, set them in place, make them level, make them stable. And you need to do this multiple times. Not just one pillar, not just 2, dozens of them, in precise arrangements, in perfect circles. The engineering alone is staggering. The logistics are impossible, or they should be. But they did it, somehow. Schmidt kept digging. That first circle was just the beginning. They found another circle nearby, different design, different carvings, then another, and another. The hilltop was covered with them. At least 20 circular structures, maybe more still buried, each one unique, each one massive. And here's where it gets stranger. The circles were built in layers, one on top of another. The oldest ones were at the bottom, buried under tons of fill dirt. Then newer circles built on top, then those buried too, layer after layer, generation after generation. The oldest layer dates to around 9,600 BCE. The youngest to around 8,200 BCE. That's 1,400 years of construction. Of building and burying and building again. Schmidt called it the world's first temple, the first monumental architecture, the first evidence of organized religion on a massive scale. But that raises more questions than it answers. Who built it? Where did they come from? How did they organize? How many people did this take? The standard model of human development says you need agriculture first. You need food surplus. You need permanent settlements. You need social hierarchy. You need all these things before you can build monuments. Göbekli Tepe flips that on its head. The monuments came first. Agriculture came later. In fact, some archaeologists now think the need to feed the people building these temples might have driven the development of agriculture. People gathered here, hundreds of them, maybe thousands. They needed food. Wild resources wouldn't support that many people for long. So they started planting, started managing herds, started settling down. The temple created civilization, not the other way around. But why? What drove them to build this in the first place? The carvings offer clues. Animals everywhere, predators mostly. Foxes, leopards, lions, snakes, scorpions, vultures. Dangerous creatures, things that could kill you. Very few prey animals, almost no deer or gazelles or wild cattle. The things they actually hunted and ate, those are mostly absent. It's like the temple represents the dangerous world, the wild, the things humans feared, the forces beyond their control. Some pillars have human arms carved on them, hands, fingers, but no faces, no eyes. Just the suggestion of bodies. beings without identity, without individual features. Maybe they represent ancestors, maybe gods, maybe the idea of human presence in abstract form. We don't know. One pillar has a carving that looks like a fox skin, draped over the stone, like the pillar is wearing it, like it's dressed for ceremony. Another has a belt carved around its middle, with a foxtail hanging from it, like clothing, like decoration, like something human. The line between human and animal blurs here. The pillars have human shapes, but no faces. Animal carvings, but human postures. Everything mixed together. Schmidt thought this represented a worldview, a way of seeing reality, where humans and animals and spirits all existed in the same space, where boundaries were fluid, where transformation was possible. Shamanic cultures think this way. The world is alive. Animals have spirits. Humans can cross over, take animal form, communicate with other realms. Maybe Göbekli Tepe was a place for that crossing, a place where the veil was thin, where people came to connect with something beyond themselves. The circles are oriented to specific stars. Some align with the summer solstice, others with constellations. The builders were tracking the sky, marking cosmic events, connecting earth and heaven. This takes planning, knowledge, generations of observation. You don't just stumble into this, you build toward it, over decades, over centuries. The people who built this weren't primitive, they were sophisticated, they had complex beliefs, organised society, specialised knowledge. They just didn't have agriculture yet, didn't have cities, didn't have writing to record what they thought. So we're left guessing, looking at stones, trying to read meaning in carvings made 11,600 years ago by people who left no other record. But the stones are enough to shatter our assumptions, to force us to rethink everything. Civilization didn't start with farming, it started with belief, with the need to build something bigger than survival, with the drive to create meaning in stone. The temple came first, everything else followed. Here's the thing about the timeline that keeps archaeologists up at night. Göbekli Tepe was built around 9,600 BCE. That's a date we can pin down pretty well. Carbon dating, tool styles, the layers of earth. Everything points to the same window. But 9,600 BCE is supposed to be impossible. Think about what else was happening in the world at that time. Actually, almost nothing was happening. Humans were scattered in small groups, maybe 20 or 30 people travelling together. They moved with the seasons, following herds, tracking water, setting up camp for a few weeks or months, then moving on. They had fire, stone tools, animal skins for clothing, probably some kind of temporary shelters, lean-tos made from branches and hides. Nothing permanent, nothing that would last. No one was farming yet. Agriculture wouldn't appear in this region for another 1,000 years. The first evidence of cultivated wheat shows up around 8,500 BCE. Barley comes later. Domesticated animals even later than that. No one was living in permanent villages. The earliest villages we know about date to around 9,000 BCE. Small clusters of round houses, maybe 50 people total, built with mud, brick and stone. Those villages came after Göbekli Tepe. Not before. No one was making pottery. Ceramic vessels don't appear until around 7,000 BCE. For thousands of years before that, people carried water in leather bags, stored food in baskets, cooked in pits lined with hot stones. No one was working metal. Copper smelting starts around 5,000 BCE. Bronze comes around 3,000 BCE. Iron even later. At Göbekli Tepe's time, the most advanced technology was chipped stone. So the people who built this temple had none of the things we think you need for monumental architecture. They were mobile. They were pre-agricultural. They had basic Stone Age technology. They lived in temporary camps, and yet they quarried limestone blocks weighing up to 16 tons. They carved them into pillars 12 feet tall. They transported them somehow. They erected them in perfect circles. They decorated them with detailed animal reliefs. They built multiple enclosures. They maintained the site for centuries, maybe longer. Then they buried the whole thing and started over. The timeline doesn't just challenge one assumption. It breaks the entire model of how civilization develops. We've always told the story in a specific order. First comes agriculture. Farming lets people stay in one place. Staying in one place leads to villages. Villages grow into towns. Towns need organization. Organization creates hierarchy. Hierarchy builds temples. That's the order. That's how it's supposed to work. Göbekli Tepe reverses it. The temple comes first, then agriculture, then villages, then everything else. It's like finding a car before the invention of the wheel. Or computer before electricity. The sequence is wrong. Klaus Schmidt spent years trying to explain this. He developed a theory. Maybe building the temple led to agriculture. Maybe gathering all these people in one place created the need for more food. Maybe that need pushed someone to try planting seeds instead of just gathering wild grain. It's possible. The wild ancestors of wheat grow all over this region. Incorn, emmer, they're everywhere on the hillsides. Someone gathering these grasses might notice that seeds fall and new plants grow, might try helping that process along, might eventually figure out cultivation. But that theory has problems too. Agriculture isn't simple. It's not something you stumble into. You need to understand growing seasons, soil preparation, seed selection, water management, storage. It takes generations to figure out. And why would hunter-gatherers bother? They had plenty of food. Studies of modern hunter-gatherers show they work less than agricultural societies, maybe 15 or 20 hours a week for all their food needs. The rest is leisure time. Farming is harder. It's more work, longer hours, less varied diet, more disease from living close to domesticated animals. Early farmers were shorter and less healthy than hunter-gatherers. Their bones show more stress, more malnutrition, more dental problems. So why switch? Maybe they had no choice. Maybe something about gathering at Göbekli Tepe changed the population dynamics. More people in one area, less mobility, wild resources getting depleted, pressure to find new food sources. Or maybe the causation runs deeper. Maybe the temple itself represents a shift in thinking that made agriculture possible. Think about what farming requires mentally. You plant seeds in spring. You won't eat until fall. That's delayed gratification. That's planning months ahead. That's believing the future will come and your work will pay off. Hunter-gatherers live more in the present. You see an animal, you hunt it. You find fruit, you eat it. The food is now. The reward is immediate, but building Göbekli Tepe also requires future thinking. You quarry stone today for a structure that won't be finished for years, maybe decades. You're working for something you might not live to see completed. That's the same mental shift, the same ability to plan ahead, to delay reward, to believe in future outcomes. Maybe that shift came first. Maybe something changed in how humans thought about time. And once that change happened, both temples and agriculture became possible. But what caused the change? We don't know. We have theories but no proof. Some researchers point to climate. The Ice Age ended around 11,700 years ago. The world warmed up, plants spread, animals multiplied. Maybe abundance gave people time to think, time to experiment, time to build. Others point to population pressure. Maybe humans reached some critical threshold. Too many people for pure hunting and gathering. The pressure forced innovation. Still others think it's about culture, about ideas spreading, about humans reaching some tipping point in social organisation. All of these might be true. None might be true. We're guessing. What we know for certain is the timeline, and the timeline is impossible by our old models. Here's another problem with the dates. Göbekli Tepe wasn't built all at once. The site has multiple layers, multiple enclosures, each one built, used, then deliberately buried, then a new one built on top. The oldest layer dates to around 9,600 BCE, the youngest to around 8,200 BCE. That's 1,400 years of construction, 14 centuries of continuous use, continuous maintenance, continuous ritual activity by mobile hunter-gatherers. For comparison, think about 1,400 years in historical time. That's from the fall of Rome to the Renaissance, that's from the pyramids to Moses, that's from Columbus to today. Imagine maintaining a single ritual site for that long, while moving around, while living in temporary camps, while having no written records to preserve the knowledge, no institutions, no priesthood, just oral tradition passed down through generations. How do you keep that going? How do you remember why the site matters? How do you teach the next generation the proper rituals, the correct way to carve the stones, the right time to bury an enclosure and build a new one? It suggests an incredible cultural continuity, a stability we don't usually associate with mobile societies. And it suggests Göbekli Tepe was more than just a temple. It was a central point, an anchor, a place that held meaning across centuries, across generations, across whatever changes were happening in the world around it. The site became a fixed point in a mobile world, the one thing that didn't move, the one place you could return to and find things unchanged, until they changed it themselves, until they buried it, until they started over. That's the pattern that repeats. Build, use, bury, build again. Each new enclosure slightly different, evolving, but following the same basic design, the same circular pattern, the same T-shaped pillars, the same inward-facing arrangement, like they were trying to perfect something, or maintain something, or remember something that kept slipping away. And then around 8,200 BCE, they stopped. The last enclosure was buried. No new one was built. The site was abandoned, covered over, lost. For 10,000 years it sat under that hill, waiting, until Schmidt found it again. Why did they stop? We don't know that either. Maybe the society that built it collapsed. Maybe their beliefs changed. Maybe agriculture finally took over and people didn't need the temple anymore. Maybe the meaning was lost. Or maybe they finished. Maybe whatever they were doing was complete. Maybe the burial was always part of the plan. The timeline raises more questions than it answers. But it proves one thing absolutely. Humans 11,600 years ago were capable of far more than we thought. They could plan. They could organize. They could create meaning and maintain it across centuries. They could build monuments that still stand today. They were us, just earlier. With different tools but the same minds, the same need for meaning, the same drive to create something lasting, something that would outlive them. They succeeded. We're still trying to figure out what they built. Here's what nobody talks about when they picture ancient construction: the actual physical impossibility of it. Moving a 16-ton stone block isn't like moving furniture. You can't just push harder. You can't get more people to help and solve the problem. Physics doesn't work that way. 16 tons is 32,000 pounds. That's the weight of about 8 cars, or 2 full-grown elephants. Try to imagine that mass, that density, that resistance to movement. Now imagine moving it without wheels, without metal tools, without draft, animals, without rope strong enough to hold that weight, without any of the technology we take for granted. The quarry at Göbekli Tepe is about 300 feet from the main enclosures, not far by walking distance, but an impossible distance for moving stone that heavy. Here's what they had to work with: stone tools, antler picks, wooden levers, maybe leather straps, though leather degrades and we can't be sure. Human muscle, that's it. Stone tools can't cut limestone efficiently. You can chip it, flake it, gradually shape it by percussion. But cutting? No. Each pillar would take months of work, maybe years. Constant hammering, constant grinding, slowly removing material one chip at a time. And these pillars aren't rough blocks. They're shaped, smoothed. The T-form is precise. The proportions are consistent across dozens of pillars. Someone had a plan, a design they followed, a standard they maintained. The animal carvings add another layer of impossibility. These aren't scratched, outlines. They're three-dimensional reliefs. The stone is carved away around the animal. The figure stands out from the background. You can see muscle definition, individual feathers on birds, the curve of a fox's tail. That level of detail requires control, patience, skill. You can't just hack at stone with another rock and create that. You need technique, practice, probably specialized tools we haven't found yet. But even if we solve the carving problem, we still have the moving problem. Experiments have been done. Modern teams trying to recreate ancient stone moving techniques, using only the technology available at the time. The results are humbling. A team of 40 people can drag a 1-ton stone on wooden rollers. Barely. It takes all day to move at 100 feet. And that's with modern knowledge, with practice, with people who understand physics and leverage and friction. Scale that up to 16 tons. You'd need hundreds of people, maybe 1,000, all pulling together, all coordinated, all fed and housed and organized. Where do those people come from? Hunter-gatherers live in small groups, extended families, maybe 30 or 40 people who travel together. You can't just call up 1,000 people for a construction project. They don't exist in one place, unless Göbekli Tepe itself was the reason they gathered, unless the construction was the point, unless building the temple was more important than anything else they did. But that creates a different problem. Feeding 1,000 people, even temporarily, even for a few weeks during construction season, that requires massive amounts of food, more than hunting and gathering can provide in one location. The animal bones found at the site tell part of the story, gazelle mostly. Thousands of gazelle bones, also wild cattle, wild boar, birds, everything hunted from the surrounding area. Some archaeologists think this proves large feasts happened here. Ritual gatherings where hundreds of people ate together. The bones show butchering marks, burning. The animals were cooked and consumed on site. But here's the thing about hunting. You can't just order up 1,000 gazelles. You have to find them, track them, kill them, process them. It takes time, skill, luck. And the more you hunt in one area, the more the animals learn to avoid that area. So either they were incredibly good hunters, or they were gathering less frequently than we think, or they had some food source we don't know about. The construction timeline makes it worse. Remember, the site was active for 1,400 years. That's not one project. That's generations of projects. Each enclosure built, used for decades or centuries, then buried, then a new one started. Every generation had to relearn the techniques, had to maintain the knowledge, had to care enough to continue the work. Think about what that means practically. An old man teaching a young man how to quarry stone, how to shape it, how to move it, how to carve, the animals, passing down the methods, the standards, the vision of what the finished structure should look like, and that young man teaching the next generation, and the next, for 14 centuries, without writing, without diagrams, just demonstration and memory and practice. The margin for error is tiny. If one generation fails to teach properly, the knowledge is lost, the technique degrades, the quality drops. But the pillars at Göbekli Tepe don't show degradation. Early ones and late ones are equally sophisticated. The skill level stays constant. That suggests an incredible cultural investment, an obsession almost. This wasn't a side project. This was central to their identity, their purpose, their reason for existing as a group. But why? What could be so important that you dedicate centuries to building and rebuilding the same circular structures? What meaning could be so powerful that it survived 1,400 years of oral tradition? We don't know. We can't know. The meaning died with them. All we have is the physical evidence, the stones, the bones, the layers of earth, and the evidence keeps revealing new problems, new impossibilities. The pillars aren't just heavy, they're also fragile. Limestone cracks, it breaks under stress. Moving a 16-ton limestone pillar without breaking it is harder than moving steel. Steel bends, limestone shatters. Yet dozens of pillars survive intact, carved and moved and erected without catastrophic breaks. Some show small cracks, repairs made with stone wedges, but most are whole, functional, still standing after 11,600 years. How many broke during construction? How many cracked during transport? How many shattered when they tried to stand them upright? We don't know. The broken ones might be buried somewhere, or they might have been so completely destroyed that nothing recognizable remains. But the success rate had to be high enough to keep trying, high enough that the project continued, high enough that they built multiple enclosures over centuries. That implies they got good at it, developed reliable techniques, learned from failures, refined their methods, became experts in stone moving, stone carving, stone architecture. Which brings us back to the same question. Who were these people? What kind of society produces expert stoneworkers when everyone is supposed to be hunting and gathering? Maybe we're wrong about hunter-gatherers. Maybe they had more specialization than we think. Maybe some people focused on stonework while others hunted. Maybe the old model of everyone doing everything is too simple. Or maybe Göbekli Tepe created specialization. Maybe the need to build this temple forced them to develop new social structures, new ways of organizing labor, new methods of cooperation. Maybe this is where hierarchy started, where some people became leaders, where others became craftsmen, where society began to stratify based on skill and role rather than just age and kinship. But that's speculation, guessing based on what makes sense to us, what fits our models of social development. The stones don't tell us about social structure, they just sit there, heavy, impossible, carved with animals that stare at nothing, arranged in circles that point at each other across empty space, and buried, always buried, deliberately covered with thousands of tons of rubble and dirt. The final impossibility, the final question. Why would you work for decades to build something, then work for decades more to bury it, then start over, then bury that one too, then start again? The effort to bury matches the effort to build. Maybe exceeds it. Filling those enclosures required moving more material than creating them did. Tons and tons of earth and broken stone, carefully placed, packed down, sealed. This wasn't abandonment. Abandonment is walking away, letting nature reclaim the space. This was intentional burial, ritual closure, ending something deliberately before beginning, something new, like they were resetting, starting fresh, trying again to get something right, or maybe completing a cycle, finishing what they started, then beginning the cycle again. The engineering challenges are real. The physical impossibilities are genuine. We can measure the weight, calculate the force required, estimate the labour needed, the numbers don't lie. But numbers don't explain motivation. Physics doesn't tell us why. Engineering can't answer the question of meaning. They did this because it mattered. Because something about these circles of stone, these carved pillars, these buried enclosures, something about all of it was worth the impossible effort, worth the broken backs and crushed fingers, worth the failed attempts and shattered stones, worth the decades of work and the generations of commitment, worth everything they had to give, and they gave it, for 1,400 years, until they stopped, until they walked away, until the site was abandoned and forgotten, and the stones waited, buried, silent, holding their secrets, holding their impossibility, until someone dug them up and asked the questions we're still trying to answer. The pillars at Göbekli Tepe are covered with animals, not just a few scattered images, hundreds of carvings. Every major pillar has something carved into it. Some have dozens of figures. The animals are specific, recognizable. Foxes with pointed ears and bushy tails, lions with manes and open mouths, boars with curved tusks, snakes coiling up the stone, scorpions with raised stingers, vultures with spread wings, spiders, insects, birds. These aren't crude stick figures. The carvings show detail, muscle definition on the big cats, individual feathers on the birds, the curve of a scorpion's tail, the texture of snake scales. Whoever made these knew these animals, had watched them, studied their movement and form. The technique is sophisticated. Most carvings are done in relief. The stone around the animal is carved, away. The figure stands out from the background, three-dimensional. You can run your hand over it and feel the shape. Some carvings go several inches deep into the limestone. That takes time. Control. You can't just hack at stone with another rock. You need to remove material gradually, carefully, one chip at a time, knowing exactly where to strike, how hard, what angle, and you need to plan. These aren't random scratches. The animals are positioned deliberately, multiple figures on a single pillar, arranged to fit the space, to work together as a composition. Some pillars have animals on all four sides, carved all the way around. Here's what's strange. The animals aren't doing anything. They're just there, standing, sitting, existing, no hunting scenes, no humans interacting with them, no narrative you can read, just animals, watching, present. Some of the poses are odd, unnatural. A fox standing upright on its hind legs, a boar with its head twisted at an impossible angle, a bird with wings that don't quite match reality. Like the carvers were showing something beyond simple representation, something symbolic, something we can't quite read. The most common animal is the fox, appears on multiple pillars, always recognizable, always with that distinctive bushy tail, sometimes alone, sometimes in groups, sometimes positioned near other animals, sometimes isolated. Why foxes? They're not particularly dangerous, not a major food source, not the biggest or strongest animal around, but they appear more than anything else, more than lions, more than boars, more than the birds of prey. Maybe foxes meant something specific to these people, represented something important, a quality, a spirit, a story we've lost. Or maybe the person who carved them just liked foxes, had a connection to them, saw them often in the landscape. Snakes appear frequently too, coiling around pillars, wrapping up the stone. Some are huge, 6 feet long, carved in such detail you can see the scales, the pattern on the body, the shape of the head, and scorpions, dozens of scorpions with their distinctive curved tails, their claws, their segmented bodies, always recognizable, always threatening, stingers raised, ready to strike. These are dangerous animals, venomous, deadly if you're unlucky, living in this region, hiding under rocks, emerging at night. A real threat to people sleeping on the ground, walking barefoot, living close to the earth. But the carvings don't show fear. They show respect, attention. The scorpions are rendered carefully, accurately, like the carvers wanted to capture exactly what they looked like, to preserve them in stone. Vultures appear on several pillars, big birds with spread wings, hooked beaks, sometimes shown in flight, sometimes perched, always watching, always waiting. Vultures eat the dead, follow death, circle over dying animals. They're associated with endings, with transformation, with the boundary between life and what comes after. Some archaeologists think the vultures are key to understanding the site, that Göbekli Tepe was connected to death rituals, to excarnation, the practice of leaving bodies exposed for birds to clean, letting the flesh return to the sky before burying the bones. There's some evidence for this. Human bone fragments found at the site, not whole skeletons, just pieces, processed, modified, some with cut marks, some deliberately shaped, like they were being prepared for something, used in some ritual we can't reconstruct. But that's speculation. The vultures could mean something else entirely, could represent rebirth, renewal, the cycle of life returning to the earth and rising again. We're reading meanings into images we don't understand, projecting our interpretations onto their symbols. What's clear is the animals mattered, enough to spend weeks carving them, enough to cover the pillars with them, enough to make them permanent, to preserve them in stone that would last thousands of years. But which animals appear is selective, deliberate. Not every animal in the region is shown. Gazelles are rare in the carvings, yet gazelle bones dominate the food remains. They ate gazelles constantly, hunted them, depended on them, but didn't carve them often. Cattle appear sometimes, wild aurochs, massive animals, dangerous when cornered, important prey, but not as common in the carvings as you'd expect given their size and significance. Leopards show up occasionally, beautiful spotted cats, powerful predators, carved with the same attention to detail as everything else, spots carefully rendered, bodies shown in motion, muscles defined. Some pillars have abstract symbols too, H shapes, circles, crescents, lines and geometric patterns. We have no idea what these mean. No context, no translation. Just shapes carved into stone alongside the animals. The H shapes appear frequently. Two vertical lines connected by a horizontal bar. Simple, consistent, repeated, across multiple pillars. Maybe they represent something, a concept, a word, a marker, or maybe they're just decorative, filling space. Some carvings show hands, human hands, arms, carved in relief like the animals, positioned on the narrow sides of the T-shaped pillars, where arms would be if the pillars were people. Reinforcing that interpretation, these stones represent beings, standing in circles, watching. But the hands have no faces, no legs, no feet, just the suggestion of human form, abstract, stylized, more symbol than representation. And then there are the carvings we can't identify, shapes that don't match any known animal, creatures with features that don't fit, combinations that don't exist in nature. Are these mythological, imaginary, or are we just failing to recognize what they represent? One pillar shows what might be a duck or a goose, some kind of waterfowl. But the proportions are wrong, the neck is too long, the body too angular, it's bird-like but not quite. A bird. Abstracted. Transformed into something else. Another shows what could be a crocodile, or a lizard, something reptilian. But crocodiles don't live in this region, never have. So either it's not a crocodile, or they travelled far enough to see one, or it represents something from memory, from stories passed down, from another place and time. The mystery deepens when you look at what's not shown. No plants, no trees, no landscape, just animals floating in empty space. No ground beneath them, no sky above, no context, no environment. It's like the carvers were creating a symbolic world, a place where animals exist outside normal reality, where foxes as lions and scorpions share space without hunting or fleeing, where everything is present but nothing interacts. Some pillars have damage, deliberate damage, carvings that were chiselled off, smoothed over, removed after they were made, like someone changed their mind, decided certain images shouldn't be there, took the time to erase them. What was removed? Why? Did the meaning change? Did the rules change? Did someone make a mistake? We can see the evidence of removal, but not what was taken away. Other carvings were left unfinished, started but never completed. A fox with only half its body carved, a snake that trails off into blank stone, a bird with one wing detailed and the other barely sketched. Like the carver stopped mid-work and never returned. The level of skill varies between pillars. Some carvings are masterful, professional, done by someone with years of experience. Others are cruder, less confident, like apprentice work, learning attempts, practice pieces, but even the crude carvings show knowledge, understanding of animal anatomy, awareness of proportion. They're not childish, just less refined, less controlled, the work of someone still developing the skill. That suggests training, teaching, a tradition of carving passed down, masters and students, knowledge transferred across generations, a craft tradition lasting centuries. The animals stare at nothing, face inward toward the centre of each circle, toward the two central pillars, toward empty space where people would have gathered, where rituals happened, where whatever this place was for took place. They watched, silent witnesses, permanent observers, carved in stone, unchanging, while generations of people came and went, while the site was used and abandoned and buried and forgotten, and now they watch us, still staring, still present, still holding whatever meaning they held when they were carved 11,600 years ago, meaning we're trying to recover, trying to understand, trying to read in stone. Let's talk about skulls, not the carvings this time, actual human skulls. Because if you dig below the animal-covered pillars, you find something even stranger. Pieces of people, but not whole skeletons, and not random. There's a pattern here. It's a pattern that points to something unsettling. A skull. Cult. That phrase sounds dramatic, but it's real. Archaeologists use it when they find cultures that treat skulls in special ways. Not every ancient site has this. It's rare. Usually people buried their dead whole, or burned them, or left them exposed to the elements. But at this place something different happened. Here's what was found. Fragments of human skulls. Not complete heads, not bodies with arms and legs, just pieces. The fragments were scattered, often near the bases of the pillars. Some were found mixed in with the fill, rubble used to bury the monument later. Others were discovered in shallow pits, almost as if they were placed on purpose. And it's not just that the skulls are there. Some of them were changed, modified. One skull fragment has deep grooves carved into it. Clean, straight lines. Someone took a stone tool and cut into the bone. Not randomly, carefully. The grooves are parallel, running from front to back. Another fragment has a hole drilled into it, perfectly round, like it was meant to hang from something or be displayed. This isn't natural damage. It's not the result of time or animals or the earth shifting. It's human work, deliberate. Someone wanted these skulls to look different. Someone spent time shaping them, even after death. And these aren't the only hints. Some skulls have red ochre on them. Ochre is a kind of clay pigment. It's been used as paint for tens of thousands of years. People used it to decorate their bodies, their tools, and sometimes their dead. In this case, it looks like they painted the bones before placing them back in the ground. When you see these things together, the grooves, the holes, the red paint, it's hard not to think of ritual. This wasn't just cleaning up after someone died. This was a process, a ceremony, something with rules, and it fits into a wider pattern. In the ancient Near East, there's a long history of special treatment of skulls. At sites like Jericho and Çatalhöyük, people dug up their dead after a while. They took the skulls, covered them with plaster, painted them and kept them in houses. Sometimes they were displayed on shelves, sometimes buried under the floor. It was a way of keeping the dead close, honouring ancestors, or maybe something deeper. But here, it's not plastered skulls. It's skull fragments, carved and painted and sometimes pierced, and they show up in the oldest layers, the same layers as the first pillars, the same time as the animal carvings. So who were these people? Were they important? Leaders? Enemies? There's no way to tell from the bones alone. The fragments don't come with names or stories. There's no writing, no grave goods, no jewellery. Just the bone itself marked by tools and time. One theory is that these were ancestors, revered figures, maybe the founders of the group, people whose bones needed to be treated with care, to keep their memory alive. In some cultures, ancestor skulls were ancestor, thought to hold power, to help the living. Maybe that's what happened here. Another idea is that these were enemies, people taken in battle or outsiders who needed to be controlled, even after death. In some places, enemy skulls were displayed as trophies, a warning, a symbol of victory. But there aren't signs of violence on these bones, no obvious trauma, no smashed faces. The modifications seem more careful, more respectful. What about shamans? Some archaeologists think these skulls belong to spiritual leaders, people who connected the living to the spirit world. If so, their heads might have been kept as a link between worlds, a way to keep their wisdom close. But again, there's no proof. And there's one more twist. Animal bones are everywhere at this place. Tens of thousands of fragments, mostly from wild animals, gazelle, boar, birds, foxes and more. But human bones are rare. Less than 1% of the total bones are human. And most of those are just skull fragments. Not arms, not legs, not ribs. That's not what you'd expect from a cemetery. Cemeteries have whole bodies, or at least a mix of bones. This is different. It's even stranger when you realise how careful the builders were with everything else. The pillars are arranged with precision, the carvings are detailed, the circles are planned, nothing is random. So the placement of the skulls probably wasn't random either. Some of the skull fragments were found right at the centre of the circles near the two largest pillars, almost as if they were part of the ritual, maybe displayed during ceremonies, then buried when the time was right. Maybe they marked certain events, a death, a change in leadership, the end of a season. And here's a detail that keeps popping up. The grooves carved into the skulls almost look like they were meant to hold something, maybe cords, or decorations, or even feathers. It's hard to know. But it suggests these weren't just bones, they were objects, made to be seen. Think about the atmosphere during a ritual. Imagine the pillars rising out of the earth covered in animal carvings, fires burning, shadows moving, people gathering in circles holding skulls decorated with paint and carvings, chanting, drumming, something lost to us. The skulls might have been passed around or set on display or used in ways we can't picture. It's the kind of scene that's hard to shake. There's another clue in the way the pillars are set up. Each circle has two pillars in the centre, taller than the rest. Some researchers think these pillars represent important beings. Maybe gods, maybe ancestors, maybe something else. The skulls found near these pillars could have belonged to people connected to them. Maybe the first priests, maybe the founders of the group, or maybe no one person at all. Maybe the skulls were symbols, not individuals. The skull cult idea isn't just a guess. It's based on real patterns. Similar things show up in other places and times. In the Neolithic, skulls became important in ways we're still trying to understand. Sometimes they were buried in special ways. Sometimes they were dug up and reburied, again and again. Sometimes they were turned into art. Always they seem to carry meaning. But the meaning changes from place to place. In some sites, skulls are about ancestors. In others, about power. Sometimes about protection, or magic, or memory. And sometimes, maybe, about fear. The fear of what happens after death. The hope that something of a person survives. At this site, the skulls are quiet. They don't tell us what they meant. But they show us that death was important. That memory was important. That the past was never truly gone. Let's look at the marks in more detail. The grooves are about 2 millimeters deep and a few centimeters long. They're always on the upper part of the skull, running in parallel lines. You can still see the tool marks, even after thousands of years. Whoever did this worked with care. The holes are drilled cleanly, with smooth edges. No cracks, no breaks. That takes skill, patience, the kind of practice you get from doing the same thing many times. And the red ochre? It's not just a splash. It's rubbed into the bone, filling the grooves, making the marks stand out. Whoever did this wanted the changes to be seen, wanted the skulls to look different from ordinary ones. There's something else. The context. The skull fragments weren't found alone. They were mixed with animal bones, broken tools, bits of charcoal. It looks like they were part of a bigger event. Maybe a feast, maybe a ceremony that involved eating, drinking, burning things, and remembering the dead. In one layer, archaeologists found a cluster of 3 skull fragments, all marked with grooves. They were placed together, as if they belonged to a group, maybe a family, maybe a set of leaders who died at the same time, or maybe the group itself was more important than the individual. And the timing matters. All this happened before farming, before cities, before writing, before any of the things that usually create complex rituals, which means this kind of ritual is older than we thought. It started with people who didn't have permanent homes, or pottery, or metal. People who travelled, hunted, gathered, and built monuments for reasons we can only guess. Why did they do it? Theories abound. Some say it was about power, keeping the memory of leaders alive. Others say it was about protection, keeping bad spirits away. Some think it was about connection, linking the living and the dead, the present and the past. One theory focuses on the animals. Maybe the skulls and the animal carvings are linked. Maybe each animal stood for a person, a spirit, a force of nature. Maybe the skulls were offered to these beings. Or maybe the animals were guardians watching over the dead. Another idea is that these rituals made the place special, sacred. By bringing skulls here, by marking them and burying them, people turned this hill into more than just a place to gather. They made it holy ground, a centre for their world. And here's what strikes me most. The rituals weren't about fear, but about memory, about keeping something alive. The dead weren't forgotten. They were brought back, again and again, through ceremony, through bone and paint and stone. There's also the question of why only skulls? Why not arms, legs, spines? Why just the head? In many cultures, the head is seen as the seat of the soul, the place where thought lives. Maybe that's why the skulls mattered most. Maybe people believed that something of the person remained there. Maybe they felt that by caring for the skull, they were caring for the spirit. But the truth is, we're guessing. The bones don't tell us what people thought. They don't whisper their secrets. All we have are the marks, the paint, the context. It's tempting to see these practices as creepy. But remember, for these people, it was normal. It was a way to deal with death, to honour the past, to keep the group connected even after someone was gone. And the care that went into the skulls, the grooves, the paint, the placement, speaks to a kind of love, or at least a deep sense of importance. These weren't trophies. They weren't thrown away. They were cherished, protected, altered for a reason. Here's another detail. The timing of the skull modifications matches the use of the circles. When the pillars went up, the skulls were there. When the site was filled in, the skulls were buried with it. It's almost as if the whole place was a giant memory box, a place to store the past, to keep it safe. And then, at some point, it all stopped. The site was filled in, the rituals ended, the skulls were buried for good. No one knows why. Maybe the group moved on. Maybe their beliefs changed. Maybe a disaster forced them away, but the memory lingered. When archaeologists dug up the site thousands of years later, the skulls were still there, waiting. The grooves still visible, the paint still clinging to the bone. What does it mean? We can only guess. But the evidence is clear. This was a place where the dead were honoured, where memory was kept alive in bone and paint and stone, where the living and the dead met in ceremonies we'll never fully understand. It's a reminder that history isn't just about big events or inventions. Sometimes it's about the quiet things, the care people took with their dead, the marks they left for the future, the rituals that shaped their world. And as strange as it seems, the skull cult at this place might be the oldest in the world. The first time people treated the dead as more than just bodies, the first memory keepers. But one pillar has a carving that might explain everything, or make it even stranger. Let's dig into one of the strangest carvings ever found on those ancient pillars. It's a picture that's puzzled everyone who's seen it. People call it the vulture stone. The real name is Pillar 43, but that doesn't sound nearly as mysterious. Imagine a tall slab of limestone, almost as tall as a person. Across the face there's a jumble of images. Some are easy to spot. There's a vulture with wings spread wide, a scorpion, a headless man, strange shapes and symbols, lines that curve and twist. Even after all these years, it's still sharp, still clear. You can run your fingers along the grooves. Why does this one stand out? Plenty of pillars have carvings of animals, but the vulture stone is different. It's busy. It's packed with images, layered and crowded like someone was trying to cram in as much as possible. And some of the pictures don't fit with the others. There's a sense that this isn't just decoration. There's a message here, hidden in stone. Let's break down what's actually on this pillar, starting from the top. The biggest figure is a vulture, wings spread, facing sideways. Right beneath it, there's a smaller bird. Its beak is thin, and it almost looks like a crane or stork. Beside the birds, there's a round shape. Some people say it looks like a sun, or maybe even a ball. Below that, you see a headless man. His arms are raised, his body arched, almost like he's fallen or reaching for something. One hand has 6 fingers. That's not a mistake. It's carved clearly. 6 lines for 6 fingers. And next to him, there's a scorpion, its tail curled up, claws out. There are other shapes too, circles, wavy lines, and what looks like the letter H. At first glance, it's chaos. But the more you look, the more it feels organised. The animals are grouped together. The human is separate. The shapes are repeated in patterns. Someone thought this through. So what does it mean? That's the big question. This pillar has inspired more debate than almost anything else found at the site. Let's look at the main theories, one by one, and see where the evidence takes us. The first idea is simple. Maybe these are just animals from daily life. People saw vultures circling overhead, scorpions crawling on the ground, and birds wading in the marshes. They carved what they knew. But if that's true, why the strange arrangement? Why the headless man? Why the extra finger? Why so many symbols packed together? Most animal carvings on other pillars are spaced out, almost calm. This one isn't. It's crowded, almost frantic. Another theory is that the images are telling a story. Maybe it's a myth, something everyone in the group knew, a tale about life and death, or a hero's journey, or a warning. The headless man could be a symbol for death. The vulture, a messenger between worlds. The scorpion, a danger or a guardian. The round shape, maybe the sun or the soul. If you squint, you can almost see a narrative. A person dies, the headless figure. Their soul rises. The vulture. There's a journey, watched over by animals and spirits. It's possible. But if it's a story, it's one we've lost the words for. There's no writing to explain it. No pictures that match it anywhere else. Then there's the cosmic theory. This is where things get wild. Some researchers think the vulture stone is a map of the sky. They point out that the animals match up with constellations. The vulture could be Cygnus, the swan. The scorpion is clearly Scorpius. The round shape could be the sun, the moon, or even a comet. Maybe the whole pillar is an ancient star chart, a record of the heavens as seen thousands of years ago. This theory goes even deeper. In 2017, a team of scientists suggested that the vulture stone records a real disaster. They say it shows a comet strike, something that happened around 10,900 BCE. Their evidence? The round shape is a comet. The animals are constellations. The headless man means death on earth. It's a warning carved in stone that something terrible happened in the sky and changed everything. Here's how they explain it. Around 12,900 years ago, the Earth's climate changed very suddenly. Temperatures dropped. Ice sheets grew again. Animals disappeared. Some scientists believe this Younger Dryas cold snap was caused by a comet hitting the planet. If true, it would have been a world-changing event. Fires, floods, darkness. For people living then, it would have been the end of everything they knew. So maybe the vulture stone is a memory of that event, a way to warn future generations, watch the sky, because sometimes death comes from above. It's a dramatic idea. It grabs your imagination. But is it true? Let's look at the evidence for this cosmic theory. First, the animals. Do they really match up with constellations? In modern astronomy, yes, we have Cygnus, Scorpius and others. But did people 11,000 years ago see the sky the same way? Nobody knows. Constellations change by culture and time. The way we see Orion or the Big Dipper isn't the same as people in ancient China or Egypt. There's no proof that these exact animals meant the same thing back then. Second, the comet. There's geological evidence for a sudden cooling period. There are layers of soot and tiny glass beads in the soil from this time, which could come from a cosmic impact. But there's no crater, no direct link to a single comet strike. The science is debated. Some experts say it was a natural climate change, nothing to do with space. Others say the evidence is solid. The argument goes back and forth. Third, the pillar itself. If it's a warning, why here? Why carve it on a temple, not on a place where everyone could see? And why so many animals if the main point is the comet? The images are mixed together, not set out in a clear order. There's another problem. The carvings on the other pillars don't match up with this cosmic message. There are no other comets, no other scenes of disaster. It's just this one pillar, If this was a warning that changed everything, you'd expect more signs, more carvings about the sky, or disasters, or fear, but you don't see that. Still, the theory has fans. It's dramatic. It gives the pillar a purpose. It turns it into a message from the deep past. Watch the sky. Remember what happened last time, but maybe there's a simpler answer. The vulture stone might not be about the sky at all. It could be about death, memory, and the human soul. In many ancient cultures, vultures are connected to death. They feed on the dead, but they're also seen as carriers of the soul. In Egypt, for example, the vulture goddess protected the dead. In Mesopotamia, birds were messengers between worlds. Maybe the people here saw vultures the same way. The headless man might be a person who has died. The raised hands could show surrender, grief, or a soul leaving the body. The round shape could be the soul itself, rising up to the sky. The scorpion might be a threat along the way, a test for the soul to pass through. The other birds could be helpers or guides. The whole scene could be a map of what happens after death, or a guide for ceremonies. This fits with what we know about the skull rituals. The care given to bones, the paint, the placement, all point to a deep concern with memory and the afterlife. Maybe the vulture stone was the centerpiece of these beliefs, a picture of what happens when you die, or what must be done to help someone on their journey. And there's more to the puzzle. The pillar has those strange H shapes. They look like letters, but they aren't. Some people think they're symbols for doors or gates. Maybe they're doorways between worlds, the living and the dead, earth and sky. Every time you see one, it marks a crossing. Maybe during rituals, people stood before the pillar, chanting or praying, asking the spirits to open the door. Or maybe the H means something else entirely. Hands, fences, bonds, there's no way to know. But they keep showing up, carved with care, never explained. Some researchers have noticed that the animals on the pillar are all dangerous or powerful. Vultures, scorpions, snakes. Maybe the pillar is about power. Who has it? How you get it? How you keep it? Maybe these animals were seen as guardians, blocking the way to the afterlife. Only the worthy could pass. Or maybe they're helpers, guides for the soul. In some myths, animals lead the dead to safety. Maybe people saw vultures as friendly, not frightening. Maybe the scorpion was a protector, not just a threat. There's also a theory that the pillar is a calendar. The animals and shapes could mark the seasons, the sky, or the timing of ceremonies. Maybe the vulture means spring, the scorpion means autumn. Maybe the H tells you when to gather, when to mourn, when to feast. People in the ancient world watched the sky closely. The stars and animals told them when to plant, when to hunt, when to start over. But again, there's no direct proof, no calendar, no writing, no instruction manual carved into the stone. We're left piecing things together, guessing from what survived. There's another detail that's easy to miss. The pillar is deeply worn. The bottom is chipped and scratched as if people touched it again and again. Maybe they believed it was lucky. Maybe they ran their hands along the vulture's wing for protection. Over time, the stone caught the marks of thousands of hands, a quiet record of faith and hope. And then there's the question of why the pillar was buried. If it mattered so much, why hide it? Why fill the whole place with dirt and stone, sealing everything away? Some think it was to preserve the memory, to protect the sacred images. Maybe people believed that once the rituals were done, the place had to be closed forever. Burying it was part of the ceremony. Others say it was fear. Maybe something changed. An earthquake, a disaster, a shift in belief. Maybe a new group took over, and the old ways had to be erased. Burying the pillars was a way to end the past, to start fresh. Or maybe it was about secrecy. Some knowledge is too powerful to leave in the open. By burying the vulture stone, the group kept their secrets safe. Only those who remembered the rituals would know what the carvings meant. It's hard not to wonder what it felt like to stand in front of that pillar thousands of years ago, firelight flickering on the stone, shadows moving across the vulture's wings. People gathered, silent or chanting, holding skulls marked with paint and grooves. Maybe they believed the images could open doors, bring back the dead, or protect the living. Maybe they just felt awe. And here's what's really interesting. The vulture stone is both unique and not alone. Other sites from the same era have pillars, carvings, and symbols that look similar, but nowhere else is there a scene quite like this. It's a snapshot of a world we can't fully enter, but we can glimpse it in stone. It's easy to get lost in theories. Maybe the pillar is a warning about comets. Maybe it's a guide for the soul. Maybe it's both or neither. What matters is that people cared enough to make it. They spent weeks, maybe months carving the images. They planned every detail. They visited, touched, remembered. Even now, the pillar keeps its secrets. We can read the shapes, trace the grooves, guess at the meaning. But the truth is buried, just like the pillar itself. And maybe that's the point. Some mysteries are meant to be kept, not solved. The story of the vulture stone is unfinished. It waits for new eyes, new ideas, and maybe, someday, a breakthrough. Whether it marks a comet, a calendar, or a journey after death, one thing is clear. The people who made it wanted to be remembered. They wanted their world to last even after the stones were hidden and the people were gone. And then, after 1,000 years, everything changed. The gathering stopped, the carvings faded, the doors, if that's what they were, closed for good. But the story doesn't end there, because what happened next is even stranger. Imagine you're standing on that rocky hill looking over the dry plains. The wind is quiet. The stones rise out of the ground like teeth. All around you there are circles of T-shaped pillars, silent and strange. Some are carved, some are plain. It feels like a place from another world. But this was a real place, built by real people, long before cities and kings and written words. Why make a place like this? Why drag stones heavier than a truck, carve them with animals and symbols and set them in circles? Why gather on this lonely hilltop year after year for so long? That's the riddle. And it's not just about how they built it, it's about what it meant. Let's break it down. First, this was no ordinary camp. It wasn't. A place to live. No trash piles, no cooking fires, no houses, no burials in the floor. Most ancient villages have that stuff. This didn't. Instead, there's art everywhere. Huge effort, but not for daily life. So what was it for? The leading idea is that this was a kind of temple. Maybe not a temple like a church or a mosque, but a sacred meeting place. Something special. Something set apart from everyday life. The circles of pillars are like rooms, but open to the sky. The carvings make it clear. This was about more than survival. Now, here's where it gets interesting. Whoever built this was still living as a hunter-gatherer. No farms, no herds of sheep or cows, no permanent houses, just small groups moving across the land, following animals and wild plants. But they kept coming back to this hill. They put their energy into building something that didn't feed them, didn't shelter them, didn't keep them warm. It was for something else. Why? The best guess is it was about bringing people together. Imagine dozens of small groups scattered across the plains. Most of the year they're apart. But at certain times, maybe once a year, maybe once every few years, they gather here. They meet, they talk, they share stories, they hold rituals. The stones are the centre. The hill becomes a magnet. This makes sense. Big gatherings are important for people who travel in small groups. You meet old friends, find new partners, trade gifts, make alliances. You share news. Maybe you remember the dead or celebrate some event. Maybe you settle disputes. All of that could happen here. The circles themselves are odd. Each one is a room, but not closed in. The pillars are like people, standing in a ring facing inward. In the middle, two larger figures face each other. It's almost like a stage or a place for something special to happen. Maybe rituals, maybe storytelling, maybe something else. The carvings add another layer. Animals everywhere, foxes, snakes, boars, birds. Some are dangerous, some just mysterious. There are no people carved except for a few arms and hands and that one headless figure. The animals are not being hunted or chased. They're just there, present, with all their power. It's almost like they're spirits or guardians. What does this tell us? Here's a theory that gets a lot of attention. This place was built to create a sense of awe, not fear exactly, more like wonder. The stones are huge, the carvings are strange, the setting is dramatic. If you're used to small camps and fires, this would blow your mind. It would feel powerful, important, and that's the point. This was a place to feel connected to something bigger, to the world, to the animals, to the spirits, to each other. A place to remember the past and think about the future. Maybe a place to talk to the dead or to the gods. Nobody had written language, but the stones carried messages, stories in pictures. Let's talk about community. When you live in tiny groups, it's easy to feel alone. But when you gather, when you build something together, you become part of something larger. This place made that possible. It let people join forces. It turned scattered families into a culture, maybe even a tribe. Some scientists think that building the circles was a kind of ritual itself. The work mattered as much as the result. You show up, you help move stones, you carve the images. The effort bonds you. Maybe it's a way to mark a new season, or a rite of passage. Maybe the building and rebuilding was part of the ceremony. Here's what makes this idea powerful. It might explain why people started to settle down. Not just here, but everywhere. If you keep coming back to the same spot, if you invest time and energy, you start to feel a connection. You want to stay longer. Maybe you plant seeds to have food when you return. Maybe you fence in some animals. Over time, temporary visits become longer ones. That's how villages start, so you could say this hilltop helped create the first steps toward farming and settled life. Not because of hunger or need, but because of meaning. People wanted to come back. They wanted to be part of something lasting. The stones made it real. Let's look at the carvings again. Why? Animals. Some experts think they're totem animals, symbols for different groups or clans. Maybe one group was the fox clan, another the boar clan, another the vulture clan. Each group would have its own pillar, its own animal, its own spot in the circle. When everyone gathered, the pillars reminded them who they were and how they fit into the whole. This fits with what we know about early societies. People need ways to organize themselves. Totems, symbols, stories, they all help. The stones became markers. They said, this is us. We belong here. But there's another angle. Maybe the animals are not about clans, but about spirits. Early people often believed that the world was full of spirits, both friendly and dangerous. The animals on the pillars could be those spirits, protectors, guides, or even warnings. Maybe people believed that by carving them, they could control or honor those forces. Some researchers think the circles were used for rituals involving the dead. The skull fragments, the paint, the placement of bones, all point to ceremonies about death and memory. Maybe people brought the remains of their loved ones here, to remember them, to ask for help, to keep their spirits close. Imagine the scene. A group arrives at the hill carrying a painted skull. They gather around the pillars, light fires, sing or chant. Maybe they place the skull on a stone. Maybe they touch the carvings for luck. The whole place becomes a theatre of memory and hope. The strange H symbols show up again and again. Nobody knows what they mean, but they look like gates or doors. Maybe they're about crossing over, from life to death, from one world to another. If so, the pillars were more than art. They were tools for moving between worlds. Let's talk about the burial of the place. After hundreds of years, the gathering stopped. The stones were buried, on purpose and carefully. Why do that? Why hide what you built? One idea is that the world changed. Maybe the climate warmed up, so the animals moved away. Maybe new groups arrived with new beliefs. Maybe farming started, and people no longer needed to gather in the old way. The temple was no longer needed. But instead of leaving it to fall apart, they buried it. A final act of respect. Another idea is that the burial was part of the ritual. Maybe the temple was retired, like an old ship or a sacred object. Once its work was done, it was put to rest. Burying the stones was a way of closing the story, sealing the mystery. Or maybe something bad happened, disease, violence, or fear. People decided it was safer to hide the stones than leave them open. Maybe they thought the spirits had turned against them, or the power of the place was too great. There's also the idea of memory. By burying the pillars, people preserve them for the future. Maybe they hoped their children or grandchildren would find them again. Maybe they wanted to hide their stories from outsiders. The earth became a vault, keeping the secrets safe. Here's another angle. Some experts think the temple was built after a disaster. Maybe a comet hit the earth, or a huge fire swept the plains. The carvings could be a memory of that event, a warning, a lesson. When the threat faded, people moved on, but they didn't want to forget. So they buried the temple, like closing a book after reading a sad story. Let's look at the big picture. This place is older than the pyramids, older than Stonehenge, older than writing, metal, or the wheel. And yet, it shows signs of planning, belief, and cooperation. It tells us that humans were thinking about big questions, life, death, memory, community, long before they had farms or cities. What strikes me most is the effort it took. Cutting, moving, and carving stone with simple tools is hard. It means people cared. They were willing to spend time and energy on something that didn't feed or shelter them. That's not about survival, that's about meaning. The idea of a cathedral comes up a lot, not because this was a church, but because it feels like a place where people gathered to reach for something higher. The stones are like prayers set in stone. The carvings are like stories frozen in time. The circles are like hands joined together. If you look at cathedrals in Europe, they took generations to build. People knew they wouldn't live to see them finished, but they built anyway, because it was about something bigger. Maybe this hilltop was the same. A project that lasted centuries. A place where people returned year after year to connect with each other and with the world beyond. The idea of burying the place is strange, but maybe it makes sense. Sometimes you need to let go of the past to move forward. Maybe the burial was a way of ending one chapter and starting another. Maybe it was a promise to remember, even as life changed. And this is where it gets really interesting. The buried stones survived, hidden for thousands of years. The world changed. Empires rose and fell. Languages were born and forgotten. But the memory of that gathering, that longing for meaning, stayed locked in the earth, waiting. Today, when we dig up those stones, we're not just finding rocks, we're finding questions. Why did people build temples before they built farms? Why did they bury what mattered most? Was it fear, hope, or just the way things had to be? Maybe we'll never know for sure. But there's something comforting in the mystery. People long ago wanted to be remembered, wanted to leave a mark. And even though their world is gone, their message, carved in stone, buried with care, still reaches us. So that's the heart of the story. A group of people, long ago, built something for reasons we can only guess. They gathered, they remembered, they hoped, and then, when the time came, they let it go, trusting that the earth would hold their secret. It's easy to look back and see only the stones, but behind every carving, every pillar, there's a story about being human, about needing each other, about facing the unknown. That's the real legacy of that forgotten hill. And the strangest part, the mystery continues. The stones are still there, half buried, half revealed. They remind us that some questions never go away. Some stories are meant to stay unfinished. Soon, everything would change. The gatherings would end. New people would arrive, and the world would move on. But for 1,000 years, this place was alive. Generation after generation climbed the hill, looked at the stones, and felt something they couldn't put into words. And then, one day, they stopped. The last visitor left. The stones were covered, the story hidden, waiting for someone to find it again. Let's zoom in on the question that won't leave archaeologists alone. Was the burial of the temple really deliberate? Or did dirt and time just swallow it up like so many other ruins? The answer matters because it tells us what kind of people built this place and what they were thinking at the end. Here's what we know. The pillars and walls didn't just collapse and get covered by chance. When scientists started digging, they saw a pattern. The stone rings were packed full of rubble. Tons and tons of small rocks, broken tools, animal bones, even pieces of older pillars, all piled in layer by layer, not just dirt blowing in from the wind. This was a planned job. Archaeologists looked for signs of natural decay. Things like fallen roofs or trenches worn by rain. They didn't find them. Instead, they saw something strange. The fill material was different from the soil outside. It was dumped in on purpose, all at once, not over centuries. The layers are thick but even. No weeds, no roots, no gradual build-up. Someone wanted these stones covered fast. And here's the kicker. In some places, big pieces of old walls and pillars were laid down inside the circles, almost like someone was breaking up the old to use as packing material. It's not just that the temple was buried, it was almost dismantled before being sealed. You see broken carvings, shattered animal figures, even chopped up human bones mixed with the rocks. This careful packing is the first big clue. When things rot away or fall over, you get a mess. Jumbled stones, collapsed roofs, wild plants growing through everything. But here, it's tidy. Like someone wanted to erase the temple, but not destroy it. It's more like a burial than a ruin. Let's talk about the fill itself. Archaeologists sifted through tons of it, bucket by bucket. They found a strange mix. There was chipped stone, the leftovers from making tools. There were animal bones, some burned, some cut with marks showing they'd been butchered. There were even a few human bones, sometimes painted with red ochre. But here's what's weird. The fill wasn't just trash. Some of the animal bones were unusual. People found skulls of wild cattle, foxes, and birds. These were animals shown on the pillars. It's almost like the builders were putting symbols into the fill just as they were on the stones. The tools mixed in are another clue. Most are broken or worn out, like someone swept up the workshop after years of carving. But a few are special, carefully shaped flint blades, not made for hard work. Some were placed in the fill with care, almost like offerings. The human bones are the strangest. They're rare, but they stand out. Some skull fragments have deep grooves cut into them, or holes drilled through. These weren't from accidents. Someone worked on these. Bones, even after death. It's almost like the fill was a memory box, a place to store bits of the past packed away for good. Let's look at the order of events. The oldest circles went up first, deep in the earth, with the biggest stones. Later, smaller circles were built on top, with less carving but the same T-shaped pillars. Over time, the builders stopped making new rings and started packing in the old ones. The pattern is clear. Build, gather, bury, repeat. Each generation added a layer, then sealed it off. Some circles were filled in while others were still in use. It's not like the temple was abandoned all at once. Instead, parts were closed off, one after another. It's as if each circle had its turn, then was put to rest. The final act was covering everything with a thick blanket of stone and earth. And then, nothing. For thousands of years, the temple slept under the hill. Let's talk about what the scientists actually saw in the ground. The walls and pillars are still standing, but only because of the fill. Without it, they would have toppled over long ago. The rubble held everything in place, like a protective shell. That's another sign this was planned. In other ancient ruins, you see stones scattered, walls leaning, pillars cracked by weather. Here, the stones are straight, the carvings sharp, even after 11,000 years. That's because they were wrapped in layers of rock and soil, safe from wind and rain. Someone wanted these carvings to last. And get this, the fill was so dense, it took modern machines days to break through. Workers had to shovel out the rocks by hand, bucket after bucket. That's not what you'd see if this was just a collapsed ruin. It's what you see when people decide to bury something on purpose. Let's move to the next piece of the puzzle. Why would people go to all this effort? Burying a temple isn't just hard work. It's a big decision. You're saying goodbye to something important. You're closing a chapter, maybe even ending a tradition. One theory is that this was a kind of ritual, not just for death, but for closing a sacred place. In some cultures, when a shrine or statue gets old, it isn't just left to rot. It's buried or hidden or taken apart with care. Sometimes it's done with prayers or ceremonies. It's a way to honour what came before, while making space for something new. There's some evidence for this idea. In the fill, archaeologists found special objects, beads, bone tools, and even small carved figurines. These weren't trash. They looked like offerings, placed as part of the burial. In some spots, piles of animal bones were stacked together, maybe leftovers from a feast, or maybe sacrifices to mark the end. But here's the twist. There aren't any signs of violence or disaster, no burned layers, no smashed pillars, no sudden collapse. The work was careful, almost gentle. This wasn't an emergency, it was a choice. Some scientists think the burial was about memory. By packing away the stones, people could keep the past safe. The carvings, the foxes, the birds, the snakes, wouldn't fade in the sun or get chipped by wind. The stories would stay, locked in the earth. Maybe someday their descendants would find them again. Here's another angle. The fill isn't just a seal, it's a record. Every stone chip, every bone, every broken tool tells a story. When archaeologists dig, they're not just uncovering the temple, they're reading a time capsule. Each layer shows what life was like, what people ate, what animals lived nearby, even what rituals mattered most. The burial preserved everything, good and bad, sacred and ordinary. It's one reason we know so much about this lost world. But there's an even stranger idea. Some experts believe the burial was meant to protect something. Not just the stones, but the power of the place. Maybe people thought the temple held spirits or dangerous memories. By covering it up, they could keep the world safe, or maybe they thought the power was spent and needed to sleep. Let's look at other places for comparison. There are a few other ancient sites where people buried old buildings on purpose. In the city of Çatalhöyük, for example, houses were sometimes filled in before new ones were built on top. But those were homes, not temples. There's nothing else quite like this on such a grand scale. That's what makes this temple unique. The people who buried it did something nobody else thought to do. They turned their past into a secret hidden beneath the earth. Let's talk about the animals again. Scientists check the bones in the fill and match them to the carvings on the pillars. There's a connection. The animals shown in stone, foxes, cattle, birds, are the same ones found in the rubble. Maybe they were important for feasts, or maybe they were symbols. Either way, they were chosen with care. Some bones show cut marks, signs of butchering. Others have traces of fire as if they were cooked. But a few bones, especially skulls, seem to have been kept whole, maybe for use in ceremonies. It's not just random leftovers. The mix of bones fits with ritual, not just dinner. The carvings and the fill tell a story together. The images on the stones show a world full of animals, spirits, and mystery. The rubble that covers them is packed with the same animals, the same symbols. It's like putting the temple to rest, surrounded by all the things that mattered most. Let's take a closer look at the human remains in the fill. Most are fragments, skulls, jawbones, teeth. Some have cuts or holes, as if they were displayed or worn. A few are painted red. This isn't normal burial. It's a special way of handling the dead, maybe for memory, maybe for magic. The fact that these bones are mixed into the burial shows that people wanted them included in the closing of the temple. Maybe they were ancestors. Maybe they were leaders or shamans. Maybe they were just people who mattered. Either way, their presence changes the meaning of the burial. It's not just stone and dirt, it's memory, locked away. Now, about the carvings. Even after being buried for 11,000 years, the images are sharp. You can see every feather on a bird, every scale on a snake. That's only possible because they were sealed up, safe from weather and sunlight. Someone wanted these pictures to survive. This brings us back to the question, was the burial an act of respect or an act of forgetting? Maybe both. Sometimes the best way to protect something is to hide it. Sometimes the best way to move forward is to let go of the past. Let's think about the organisation needed for this job. To bury a giant stone temple, you need planning, you need workers, you need materials. It's not a quick task. It would have taken weeks, maybe months. People had to carry rocks, break up old walls, fill in every gap. That takes cooperation and a shared goal. There are no signs of fighting, no burned layers, no weapons left behind. This wasn't war. It was a community coming together to say goodbye. Let's talk about the tools found in the fill. Most are broken, but a few are perfect. Some are sharp flint blades, too fine for heavy work. Others are decorated with notches or paint. These could be ritual objects, tools used for ceremony, then given up as a final gift. Their presence in the burial shows that the end of the temple wasn't just physical, it was spiritual too. And then there's the pottery, or rather, the lack of it. The fill has almost no pottery shards. That's strange, because by the time the last layers were packed in, people nearby were already making pots. The absence of pottery means the burial happened early, before new ways of life took over. It's a sign that the end of the temple was the end of an era. Let's zoom out. The evidence is clear. The burial was planned and careful. The rubble was packed in, not blown in by chance. The objects inside, bones, tools, even bits of painted skull, were chosen, not just dumped. The carvings were protected, not smashed. The pillars were left standing, not knocked over. All of this points to a people who cared deeply about what they'd built and wanted to close it in a way that mattered. But the question remains, why? The evidence tells us what happened, but not what people were feeling. Were they sad, relieved, hopeful for the future? We can only guess. Some archaeologists think the burial marks a shift in belief. Maybe people decided the old ways weren't working. Maybe new ideas, new gods, or new rituals took over. Burying the temple was a way to say, we're moving on. Others see it as a mark of respect. The temple had served its purpose. It was time to let it rest, like an old friend who'd done their duty. There's even a theory that the burial was a warning. Maybe something bad happened. A drought, a disease, a time of fear. Sealing the temple was a way to keep danger at bay. And then there's the idea that the burial was about hope. By hiding the stones, people could leave a message for the future. Maybe they dreamed that someday someone would dig them up and wonder, just like we do now, here's what matters. The burial wasn't an accident. It was a choice, a huge, difficult, meaningful choice. The evidence is in the rocks, the bones, the carvings, and the fill. Every detail says the same thing. Someone cared enough to end this story the right way. And this is where it gets really interesting. The care, the planning, the effort, it all adds up to something more than just a practical job. It's a statement, a sign that people, even 11,000 years ago, wanted to control their own story. They didn't just let the past fade, they shaped it, sealed it, and sent it into the future. That's what the evidence shows. The temple wasn't lost by accident. It was buried on purpose. The question is why? And no one knows for sure. When you try to get into the heads of people from so long ago, things get tricky. We see the stones, the carvings, the way the temple was packed up and hidden. But we can't sit them down and ask, why'd you do it? All we have are clues. So scientists build theories. Some are practical, some are spiritual, some are a little wild. But each one tells us something about how people might have thought, felt, or dreamed back then. Let's start with the most basic idea. Maybe they buried the temple because they didn't need it anymore. Sounds simple, right? Cultures change. People move on. Something better comes along. Maybe the temple got old and lost its meaning. Maybe the group who built it died out or moved away. New people could have come in, seen the old stones and decided to put them to rest. That happens all the time in history. But here, the care taken with the burial makes this theory feel thin. If you're just done with a building, you usually let it fall apart. You don't spend months packing it up. There's another take, one that's all about ritual. The burial wasn't just an end, but a ceremony. A farewell ritual so big, it took an entire community. In some cultures, when a sacred object gets old, you don't throw it away. You hide it. You wrap it up. You treat it like a living thing that needs help to rest peacefully. Maybe the temple was seen as a being, or as the home of spirits. Covering it with stone and earth could have been like closing a book. This chapter's over, let's do it right. Now, think about the animal bones and carved tools found in the fill. These aren't just leftovers from dinner or random trash. Some are rare animals, some are shaped stones that took hours to make. It's almost like people were making offerings or gifts to the buried temple. Maybe each object was a way to say goodbye, or to ask for luck in whatever came next. This isn't unique to one place or time. Even today, people leave flowers or notes at graves. The feeling is the same, a wish to connect, even as things end. Here's a bigger theory that gets talked about a lot. Maybe the burial was about protection. Not just protecting the stones from weather, but protecting people from what the temple represented. Imagine if you thought the old gods, or the spirits in the carvings, were dangerous if left out in the open. Maybe the world was changing. Maybe new beliefs were taking hold, and the old ones felt risky. Sealing up the temple could have been a way to keep that old power in check. Lock it up. Don't let it loose. This idea isn't as strange as it sounds. In other parts of the world, people sometimes bury dangerous objects or build walls around old shrines. It's a way to show respect, but also to draw a line. We're moving on, but we don't want trouble. There's even a story from ancient Egypt where old temples were bricked up and sealed just in case the magic inside was too strong to leave uncovered. Another possibility is about memory. Maybe the burial was a kind of time capsule, something meant to hold the past safe until the future was ready for it. It's a comforting idea. Maybe they knew life was changing. Maybe farms and villages were about to appear, and the old ways were fading. By sealing up the temple, they could keep a piece of their story for their children, or even for strangers thousands of years later. We were here. This mattered. Don't forget. It's possible they even hoped someone would find it again. When you look at how carefully the fill was packed, how the pillars were left standing, it almost feels like an act of faith, like saying, we're not destroying this, we're saving it. There's no proof for this, of course, but it's hard not to wonder. Let's talk about another angle. What if the burial was about change, about shifting from one kind of life to another? Around the time the temple was covered, people in this region were starting to settle down. Farming was on the rise. Wild wheat and barley were turning into crops. Camps were turning into villages. The old ways of hunting and gathering were fading. Maybe the temple belonged to the world of nomads, of moving with the herds. As people settled, maybe it didn't fit anymore. Covering it up could have been a way to say, that's over, we're different now. You see a pattern like this in other places. When big changes come, new rulers, new religions, new ways of living, old monuments sometimes get buried, burned, or left behind. It's not always about anger or disrespect. Sometimes it's just about marking the moment when everything shifts. From now on, we do things a new way. The burial could have been a symbol of that change. Here's an even wilder idea. Some scientists wonder if the people who built the temple were trying to control the future. Maybe they thought sealing up the stones would bring luck or good harvests or keep disease away. People have always tried to shape their luck with rituals. Maybe the burial was like a giant wish for the next chapter. Let this act bring us good things. Let's look at the evidence for a minute. In the fill, archaeologists found layers of animal bones, stone tools, and even painted skull fragments. The mix isn't random, it's chosen. Burned bones could mean feasts or sacrifices. Painted skull bits might be about remembering the dead or honouring ancestors. Special tools could be gifts for the spirits. All these things suggest careful planning, not just cleaning up. What's interesting is that the burial wasn't quick. It happened over time. One circle after another was packed and sealed, sometimes while the others were still in use. That shows a process, not a single event. Maybe every generation had its own reason to close off a circle. Maybe every group added their own layer of meaning. It's like building up a story, one chapter at a time. Some archaeologists think about the big picture. They ask why people would build something so huge, then cover it up. Maybe the answer is about community. Building the temple could have brought people together, working side by side, dragging stones, carving animals, sharing food. It's a bonding experience. When that's over, you need a new ritual to hold the group together. Burying the temple could have been that new ritual, a way to keep the group strong, even as life changed. Now let's step back and ask a simple question. Why not just leave the temple standing? Why go through all the effort to bury it so carefully? The answer might be about respect. In some places, when something sacred gets old, you don't just walk away. You close it down the right way. Make sure it ends well. That way, nothing is left undone. No spirits left angry. No ancestors forgotten. There's also the idea of renewal. By burying the old, you make space for something new. Maybe the hill was used again, for new gatherings or new buildings. Maybe the burial was a way to clear the slate, start fresh, but not forget what came before. Some people ask if the burial was about fear. Maybe people were scared. Maybe something happened, a drought, a disease, a bad omen that made the temple seem risky. Covering it up could have felt like insurance, just in case. Lock it away and hope for better days. Fear is a powerful force. It shapes decisions in every age. But there's no sign of disaster in the layers. No burned stones. No toppled walls. The work is too neat for panic. That doesn't mean fear wasn't there. Sometimes the scariest things are the ones you can't see. Bad luck, angry spirits, or simple worry about the future. Another theory that gets attention is that the burial was about power. Not spiritual power, but social power. Maybe leaders wanted to show control. We can build this. We can end it when we want. That's a strong message. It tells everyone who's in charge. The act of burying the temple could have been as important as building it. Both show unity, planning, and strength. Some scientists wonder if it was about competition. Maybe there were other groups nearby. By sealing up the temple, the builders could keep its secrets safe. Don't let outsiders see the carvings. Don't let rivals use the space. Hide your best work. Keep your story for yourself. Or maybe, in the end, it's all simpler than we think. People get attached to places. They build, they remember, they move on. Sometimes they leave a mark. Sometimes they cover it up. Maybe the burial was just the final chapter of a long shared story. A last act of care before turning the page. What strikes me most is how human all these theories are. We see the same patterns across time. Build something big. Fill it with meaning. Say goodbye in a way that feels right. Whether it's a temple, a house, or even a favourite old tree, people want to end things well. And this is where it gets really interesting. The more you study the burial, the more it seems like a message across time. A message that says, we were here, we mattered, we wanted to be remembered. Whether it was about fear, hope, respect, or change, the burial was not an accident. It was a choice. So we're left with a riddle. The stones are silent. The carvings don't explain themselves. All we have are the traces left behind. Each theory is a guess, built from broken bones and chipped stone. But that's the magic of history. You look at what's left, and you try to listen anyway. And so the hill sat silent for 10,000 years. Here's what sticks with you after hearing the story of this buried temple. It's not just about the stones or the carvings. It's not even about how old everything is. What really gets you is how much is left unsaid. They built something incredible. Then, for reasons we still don't fully get, they put it to rest. Not with fire or wrecking balls, but with care. Layer after layer, they tucked it away under earth and rock. Think about how hard that must have been. Moving big stones is tough enough. Packing them in, filling every gap, covering up the artwork, none of that happens by accident. It takes planning. It takes teamwork. You don't just wake up one day and decide to bury your biggest project. There must have been arguments. Some people probably wanted to keep it standing. Others might have felt it was time to move on. Maybe there was a ceremony, maybe not. We can only guess. What's clear is that this was a turning point. Whatever the reason for the burial, it was the end of one story and the beginning of another. After the temple was buried, the land changed. New ways of living took over. Farming began, villages grew, people settled down, and the world of constant movement faded. The old meeting place disappeared beneath the hill, silent and hidden. Now, thousands of years later, we're left piecing together the clues. Every carved animal, every layer of packed rubble, every fragment of bone, each one is a quiet message. Not a full sentence, just a hint. Sometimes that's all history gives us. Fragments. It's easy to wish for answers, for a clear reason, written in stone, telling us exactly what happened and why. But most of the time, history doesn't work that way. The people who buried the temple weren't thinking about us. They didn't expect anyone to dig up their work and wonder about their choices. They were just doing what felt right to them. So, what do we do with a mystery like this? We can guess. We can build theories and argue about rituals, power, fear, or hope. But maybe the real lesson is simpler than any theory. Maybe it's about the human need to mark endings, to finish things the right way, to leave something behind that says, we were here, we cared, this mattered. It's a feeling you see in other places too. Old buildings sealed up, special objects hidden away, stories passed down even when the details are lost. People want to be remembered. They want their actions to have meaning, even if no one ever sees them again. And here's something else to think about. The people who buried this temple didn't have writing. No books, no records, no list of rules. But they left a message anyway. Not with words, but with stone, with effort, with careful choices. That's something deep inside all of us. The urge to leave a mark, to set down a story, even if the ending is a mystery. Sometimes that's enough. You don't have to solve every puzzle. You can stand on the hill, feel the wind, and know that someone stood there long before you. They looked at the same sky. They worried about their future just like we do. They cared about their past just like we do. In that way, we're not so different. And that's what makes history like this so powerful. It connects us, even across thousands of years. We may never know for sure why the temple was buried. We may never figure out every carving or every layer of stone. But we can still feel the weight of the choices made. The care, the effort, the desire to end things well. Maybe that's the real story here. Not a list of facts or a single reason, but a feeling. A sense of people doing their best to honour something they built together. Trying to find the right way to say goodbye. Trying to trust that, even if the world changed, their story would not be lost. So the hill stayed quiet. The stones kept their secrets. The world moved on. But the story didn't end. It waited, silent and patient, for someone to listen. And now, that story is yours too.